The concept of man. Everything in the world, from solar systems to man and from man to atom, either rises or descends, either evolves or degenerates, either develops or decays. But nothing evolves mechanically, only degeneration and destruction proceed mechanically. Help from outside is possible only in so far as it is valued and accepted, even if it is only by feeling in the beginning. The language in which understanding is possible is constructed upon the indication of the relation of the object under examination to the evolution possible for it, upon the indication of its place in the evolutionary ladder. For this purpose, many of our usual ideas are divided according to the steps of this evolution. Once again, let's take the idea man. In the language to which this refers, instead of the word man, 7 words are used, namely, man number 1, man number 2, man number 3, man number 4, man number 5, man number 6 and man number 7. With these 7 ideas, people are already able to understand one another when speaking of man. Man number 7 means a man who has reached the full development possible to man, and who possesses everything a man can possess. That is will, consciousness, permanent and unchangeable I, individuality, immortality and many other properties that in our blindness and ignorance we ascribe to ourselves. It is only when, to a certain extent, we understand man number 7 and his properties that we can understand the gradual stages through which we can approach him and thereby understand the process of development possible for us. Man number 6 stands very close to man number 7. He differs from man number 7 only by the fact that some of his properties have not yet become permanent. Man number 5 is also for us an unattainable standard of man, for it is a man who has acquired unity. Man number 4 is an intermediate stage and we shall examine him later. Man number 1, number 2 and number 3, these are people who constitute mechanical humanity on the same level on which they are born. Man number 1 means a man in whom the center of gravity of his psychic life lies in the moving center. This is man of the physical body, a man with whom the moving and instinctive functions constantly outweigh any emotional or thinking functions. Man number 2 means man on the same level of development, but man in whom the center of gravity of his psychic life lies in the emotional center, that is man with whom the emotional functions outweigh all others. The man of feeling, an emo or emotional man. Man number 3 means man on the same level of development, but one in whom the center of gravity of his psychic life lies in the intellectual center, that is man with whom the thinking functions gain the upper hand over the moving, instinctive and emotional functions. The man of reason, who goes into everything from the theoretical standpoint, and from mental considerations. Every man is born number 1, number 2 or number 3. Man number 4 is not ready-made. He is born 1, 2 or 3 and becomes 4 only as a result of efforts of a definite character. Man number 4 is always the product of schoolwork. He can neither be born nor develop accidentally, or as the result of ordinary environmental conditioning, and influences of upbringing, education and so on. Man number 4 already stands on a different level to man number 1, man number 2 and man number 3. He has a permanent center of gravity that consists of his ideas, in his valuation of the work and in his relation to the school. In addition, his psychic centers have already begun to be balanced. One center in him cannot have such preponderance over others, as is the case with people of the first 3 categories. He already begins to know himself, and begins to know where he is going. Man number 5 has already been crystallized. He cannot change as man number 1, man number 2 and man number 3 change. But it must be noted that man number 5 can be the result of right work and he can also be the result of wrong work. He can become number 5 from number 4 and he can become number 5 without having been 4. If this is the case, then he cannot develop further, cannot become man number 6 and 7. In order to become 6, he must again melt his crystallized essence, must intentionally lose his being of man number 5 and this can be achieved only through terrible suffering. Fortunately, these cases of wrong development occur very rarely. The division of man into 7 categories or 7 numbers explains thousands of things which otherwise cannot be understood. This division gives the first concept of relativity as applied to man. Things may be one thing or another thing according to the kind of man from whose point of view, or in relation to whom they are taken. In accordance with this, all of the inner and all the outer manifestations of man, all that belongs to man, and all that is created by him is also divided into 7 categories. It can therefore be said that there exists a knowledge number 1 based upon imitation or upon instincts, learned by heart and crammed or drilled into a person. Number 1, if he is man number 1 in the full sense of the term, learns everything like a parrot or a monkey, and becomes a foot soldier or an athlete. The knowledge of man number 2 is merely the knowledge of what he likes. What he does not like, he does not know. Always and in everything, he wants something pleasant. If he is a sick man, he will on the contrary know only what he dislikes, what repels him and evokes in him fear, horror and loathing. Man number 2 is therefore an obsessive and self-indulgent artist, musician or actor. The knowledge of man number 3 is knowledge based upon subjective, logical thinking, upon words and upon literal understanding. It is the knowledge of bookworms, of scholastics and scientists. Men number 3 have, for example, counted how many times each letter of the Arabic alphabet is repeated in the Holy Quran of the Prophet Muhammad, and upon this have based an entire system of the interpretation of the Quran. The knowledge of man number 4 is a very different kind of knowledge. It is knowledge that comes from man number 5, who in turn receives it from man number 6, who has received it from man number 7. However, man number 4 assimilates of this knowledge only what is possible according to his powers. But in comparison with man number 1, man number 2 and man number 3, man number 4 has begun to break free from the subjective elements of his knowledge, and to move along the path towards objective knowledge. The knowledge of man number 5 is whole, indivisible knowledge. He has now one indivisible eye and all of his knowledge belongs to this eye. He cannot have one eye that knows something that another does not know. What he knows, the whole of him knows. His knowledge is nearer to objective thinking than the knowledge of man number 4. The knowledge of man number 6 is the complete knowledge possible for man but can still be lost. The knowledge of man number 7 is his own knowledge that cannot be taken away from him. It is the objective and completely practical knowledge of all. It is exactly the same therefore with being. There is the being of man number 1, that is the being of a man living by his instincts and his sensations. The being of man number 2, that is the being of the sentimental and emotional man. The being of man number 3, the being of the rational and theoretical man, and so on. It becomes clear then why knowledge can never be very far away from being. Man number 1, 2 or 3 cannot, by reason of his being, possess the knowledge of man number 4, number 5 or higher. Whatever you may give him, he will interpret it in his own way. He will reduce every idea and percolate it to the level on which he is himself. The same order of division into 7 categories must then be applied to everything relating to man. There is art number 1, that is the art of man number 1, imitative, copying art or crudely primitive and sensuous art such as the dances and music of primitive peoples. There is art number 2, sentimental art such as Russian iconography. Art number 3, intellectual and invented art, schematics, spreadsheets and charts. Then there must be art number 4, number 5 and so on. In exactly the same manner there exists the religion of man number 1, that is to say a religion consisting of rites, of external forms, of sacrifices and ceremonies imposing splendor and brilliance, or on the contrary of a gloomy, cruel and savage character. There is the religion of man number 2, the religion of faith, love, adoration, impulse, enthusiasm, spontaneous exhortation, that soon becomes transformed into the religion of persecution, oppression and the extermination of heretics and heathens. There is the religion of man number 3, the intellectual, theoretical religion of proofs and arguments, of law, treatise and doctrine based upon logical deduction, consideration and interpretation. Religions number 1, number 2 and number 3 are really the only ones we know. All known and existing religions and all denominations of the world belong to one of these 3 categories. What the religion of man number 4 or man number 5 and so on is, we do not know and we cannot know as long as we remain what we are. If instead of religion in general we take for example Christianity, then there exists a Christianity number 1, that is to say, paganism in the guise of Christianity. Christianity number 2 is an emotional religion, sometimes very pure but without force, sometimes full of bloodshed and horror leading to inquisition, and to religious wars. Christianity number 3, instances of which are afforded by various forms of Protestantism, is based upon dialectic, argument, theories and so forth. Then there is Christianity number 4, of which men number 1, number 2 and number 3 have no concept whatsoever. In actual fact Christianity number 1, number 2 and number 3 are simply an exoteric external imitation. Man number 4 strives to be Christian and only man number 5 can actually be a Christian, for to be a Christian means to have the being of a Christian, that is to live in accordance with Christ's precepts. Man number 1, number 2 and number 3 cannot live in accordance with Christ's precepts, because with them everything happens. Today is one thing and tomorrow it is quite another thing. Today they are ready to give away their last shirt, and tomorrow to tear a man to pieces because he refuses to give up his shirt to them. They are swayed by every chance event and circumstance or campaign. They are not masters of themselves, and therefore cannot decide to be Christian and really be Christians. Science, philosophy and all manifestations of man's life and activity can be divided in exactly the same way into 7 categories. However, the ordinary language in which people speak is very far from any such divisions, and this is why it is so difficult for people to understand one another. In analyzing the various subjective meanings of the word man, we have now seen how varied, contradictory, and above all how concealed and how unnoticeable, even to the speaker himself, are the meanings and shades of meaning created by habitual association that can be put into just one small word. Let us take then for example another word, the term world. Each man understands it in his own way and each man in an entirely different way. Everyone when he hears or pronounces the term world has associations entirely foreign and incomprehensible to another. Every concept of the world, every habitual form of thinking, carries with it its own associations, its own ideas. In a man with a religious concept of the world, a Christian for example, the word world will call up a whole series of religious ideas. Will necessarily become associated with the idea of God, with the idea of the creation of the world or the end of the world, the sinful world, heavenly world, and so on. For a follower of Vedantic philosophy, the world before anything else will be illusion, Maya. A theosophist will think of the different planes, the physical, the astral, the mental, and so on. A spiritualist will think of the world beyond, the world of spirits. A physicist will look upon the world from the point of view of the structure of matter. It will be a world of molecules, atoms, or electrons. For the astronomer, the world will be a world of stars and nebulae, the phenomenal and the noumenal world, the world of the fourth and other dimensions, the world of good and the world of evil, the material world and the immaterial world, the proportion of power in the different nations of the world, can man be saved in the world, and so on. People have thousands of different ideas about the world and yet not one general idea that would enable them to understand one another, and to determine immediately from what point of view they desire to regard the world. It is impossible to study a system of the universe without studying man. At the same time, it is impossible to study man without studying the universe. Man is an image of the world. The same laws that created the whole world created him. By knowing and understanding himself he will know and understand the whole world, and all the laws that create and govern the world. At the same time, by studying the world and the laws that govern the world he will learn and understand the laws that govern him. In this regard, some laws are understood and assimilated more easily by studying the objective world, while man can only understand other laws by studying himself. The study of the world and the study of man must therefore run parallel, one helping the other. With regard to the term world, it is necessary to understand from the outset that there are many worlds and that we live not in one world, but in several worlds. This is not readily understood because in ordinary language the term world is generally used in the singular, and if the plural worlds is used it is merely to emphasize as it were the same idea, to express the idea of various worlds existing parallel to one another. Our world does not have the idea of worlds contained, one within another, and yet the idea that we live in different worlds precisely implies worlds contained one within the other, to which we stand in different relations. If we desire an answer to the question, what is the world or worlds in which we live, we must first ask ourselves what is it that we might call world, in the most intimate and immediate relation to us. To this we might answer that we often give the name world to the world of people, to humanity in which we live, of which we form part. But humanity forms an inseparable part of organic life on earth, and therefore it would be right to say that the world nearest to us is organic life on earth. The world of animals, plants and men. But organic life is also in the world, so what then is world for organic life? To this we can answer that for organic life, the earth is world, but the earth is also the world, so what then is world for the earth? World for the earth is the planetary world of the solar system, of which it forms part. What then is world for all the planets taken together? The sun, or the sphere of the sun's influence, the solar system of which the planets form part. For the sun in its turn, world is our world of stars or the Milky Way, an accumulation of a vast number of solar systems. Furthermore, from an astronomical point of view, it is quite possible to presume a multitude of worlds existing at enormous distances from one another, in the space of all worlds. These worlds taken together will then be world for the Milky Way. Further passing to philosophical conclusions, we might say that all worlds must form some, for us incomprehensible and unknown whole or one, as an apple is one. This whole or one, or all which may be called the absolute or the independent, because including everything within itself, it is not dependent upon anything and is world for all worlds. Logically it is quite possible to think of a state of things where all forms one single whole. Such a whole will certainly be the absolute, which means the independent because it, that is the all, is infinite and indivisible. The absolute, that is the state of things when the all constitutes one whole, is as it were, the primordial state of things out of which, by division and differentiation, arises the diversity of the phenomena observed by us. Man lives in all these worlds but in different ways. This means that he is firstly influenced by the nearest world, the one immediate to him of which he forms part. Worlds further away also influence man, directly as well as through other intermediate worlds. But their action is diminished in proportion to their remoteness, or to the increase in the difference between them and man. It will be seen later, that the direct influence of the Absolute does not reach man. But the influence of the next world and the influence of the star world are already perfectly clear in the life of man, although they are certainly unknown to science.